72 with the last 3 holes, but still managed to get a tournament record for a 72-hole score of 19 under par. The former LPGA world number 1, Ai Miyazato, has decided to quit golf because she's lost the motivation to play. A warning, there is some flash photography coming up in the pictures we're about to show you. Miyazato captured 25 professional titles during her career, but she hasn't won a tournament in 5 years. She said the lack of success has diminished her drive to keep going. The 31-year-old joined the LPGA Tour in 2006 and has earned more than $8 million in her career. Now, Ben Ainsley's attempt to challenge for the America's Cup final took a big blow after his crew lost both their races on Sunday. On day 2 of the qualifiers in Bermuda, the British Land Rover BAR team were beaten by defending champions Oracle Team USA and Emirates Team New Zealand. Now, in the contest with the USA, watch here as Ainsley's team grabbed the advantage, but then nosedive after gate 3. They nearly broke the boat, apparently, according to their technical engineer. Britain still in touch with series leaders New Zealand, though, thanks to 2 bonus points they brought in from the America's Cup World Series. Now, just before we go, England are having a shocker at Lord's with a major batting collapse against South Africa in cricket's Champions Trophy. A short time ago, they were 38 for 6. They lost all their top 6 batsmen for just 21 runs. You can follow that live on our website, bbc.com/sport. I'm Nick Marshall-McCormack. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Forge of Empires. Develop your own city from the Stone Age to the future. Available in the App Store and at FOE.tv. Forge of Empires. Play now.
The Chinese script is one of the most complex and ancient writing systems in the world. Some say dating back over 6,000 years. But in the modern age, it's facing new challenges. There are about 50,000 Chinese characters in the modern language. Not many people master them all, but you will need to know about 1,000 just to read a newspaper. I've come to Anyang City to join a handwriting class.
When I first started learning Chinese, the hardest part by far was not the speaking, but the writing. I mean, when you think about it, thousands of tiny characters, all with their own individual meanings.
But today, people's reliance on texting and typing means their relationship with writing is changing.
Hello, welcome along to our World Weather Roundup, beginning in North America, and it's southern areas that are likely to see some intense downpours and thunderstorms during Monday from southern Texas along the Gulf Coast. These downpours will be accompanied by frequent lightning, large hail, some very squally gusty winds, and there is the potential for some tornadoes as well. Pretty warm and humid down to the south, but further north and especially across the northeast, actually a fairly cool feel to the weather. Some scattered downpours and thunderstorms here, some heat building in for a time across the desert southwest. To South America now and across the Amazon basin, particularly for Colombia, further very heavy downpours in the forecast, although the rain perhaps just easing off a little bit compared with what we've seen over recent weeks. Heavy downpours across central areas of Africa, South Africa, where we could really do with some rain, stays stubbornly dry with temperatures of 22 degrees in Cape Town. Blustery winds across the Middle East, a shamal developing across southeastern Iraq, Kuwait, the eastern side of Saudi Arabia into Qatar. That could cause some travel problems. It could certainly pick up some dust and sand blowing it around, reducing visibility. Now we have a cyclonic storm that's developed in the Bay of Bengal, pushing its way up towards Bangladesh and Myanmar during Tuesday. Could deliver 500 millimetres of rain, damaging winds, a storm surge that could cause some big issues, and also further heavy rain across Sri Lanka as the monsoon begins to set in. There could be more flooding in this part of the world. And this southwesterly flow will also be driving a lot of rain into coastal areas of Myanmar, down into parts of Thailand as well. Again, there's the risk of flash floods here. The weather doesn't look too bad across Japan, with some sunny spells and temperatures of 25 degrees in Tokyo. Finally, to Australasia, pretty chilly across the southeast of Australia. In fact, overnight frosts are likely over the next couple of days. Some spells of wet weather at times across New Zealand. That's all from me for now.
Tartu, Estonia's second largest city. Like most cities, graffiti and street art provoke around every corner, if you know where to look. It's also home to one of the biggest spray-painted pieces I've ever laid eyes on. But Albert's been painted dot by dot. And I've been promised I too can achieve artistic genius with the right tools. Believe it or not, these pictures have all been painted with spray paint. They've been pieced together splodge by splodge by the spray printer device.
My daughter wanted a unicorn on her wall, but I couldn't draw. so that pushed me towards creating this device.
To make these magical masterpieces, you need the right kit. A smartphone with the appropriate app installed, an external battery pack to keep it fully juiced, a tripod to hold it steady, some paint, and of course the spray printer. First you select an image and align it against the area you want to paint, so the image is projected like a giant virtual sticker. Portraits with shadows work best. The phone's camera exposes for the LED on the device, and when it illuminates, it sends the can's location to the app. The phone then tells the printer its coordinates, and the printer decides when to spray and when not to. Once you get the knack of it, it's actually surprisingly simple to use. You just have to make sure you go from left to right, or right to left, very smoothly in a straight line. For all its geeky brilliance, it's a real labour of love. Even the most simple of designs takes several hours. Depending on how complex the picture and the size, the amount of layers, the different colours you want to paint with, that determines how long doing one of these is going to take.
You need to move your hand relatively steady. So if you start moving your hand very quickly, you're losing accuracy.
Not sure I could really stand here for several hours doing this, but
with the next model, you should be able to move your hand relatively freely as you would with a regular paintbrush.
To give your arm a rest, the team have already started developing robotic versions to do the spraying for them, meaning larger, more complex images.
I developed this extra accessory for spray printer to automate the process. Because for high-scale images, the handheld method takes too much time and effort.
Soon, others will be able to join in too, hopefully speeding things up a bit. But does the printer help artistic expression, or simply kill it?
A person who can't draw at all, this gives like a guidelines how to paint. It's like a sort of a coloring book, but you can go over the lines, but the paint will still only land in the right places. I think for the people like myself, we call them artistically challenged. And I think this device, it gives them new power.
The finished result, it started off only a few small dots. You actually have to stand back a few feet to get the full view, to get the right perspective on it. How good is that? Yep, and in true Blue Peter fashion, here's one I made earlier. Yep, all me. Yep, entirely done by me.
all of it.
For the times of the full-length Click this weekend, check out our website, bbc.com/click.
You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories. During the campaign, Emmanuel Macron promised to deal firmly with Russia. So how will talks between the new French president and Vladimir Putin go in their first face-to-face meeting today? 1 week on from the last launch, North Korea test fires another missile, this time landing in Japanese waters.
Via Square.
A Swedish satire on the art world takes the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, the Palme d'Or. Also in the programme, Aaron's looking at the ongoing problems for British Airways.
Yeah, and Tim, I tell you what, it could be a $130 million power failure because as BA's flights, the disruptions, enter a third day, the airline is starting to count the cost. Look, stay with us. I'm going to explain and bring you the latest. As British Airways says that its IT system is now almost fully operational, but I tell you what, that is going to mean very little for the thousands of passengers caught up in the cancellation chaos.
Hello and welcome to GMT with me, Tim Wilcox. French President Emmanuel Macron's election campaign was subjected to repeated cyber attacks, with his aides accusing the Kremlin of mounting a smear campaign against him. And Moscow made it clear that they wanted Marine Le Pen, not him, to win. Vladimir Putin going as far as actually meeting her during the campaigning. Well, today, the new French president will welcome the Russian leader to the Palace of Versailles, 300 years since Peter the Great visited France. Let's get the view of the meeting from both sides. Hugh Schofield joins us in Paris, Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. So Emmanuel Macron, Hugh, getting his own back with huge flattery for Vladimir Putin today.
Yes, and the symbolism of the visit to Versailles is, of course, very significant. It's a form of flattery to take Vladimir Putin to the place where Peter the Great came 300 years ago, and there is indeed an exhibition which the two are opening now. That is a pure coincidence, but it is fortuitous that it should happen just at this moment. There's a double symbolism, though, in all of this. I mean, there's a lot of fanfare and pomp and so on attached to Versailles, which means that, in a sense, Macron is flattering, but Versailles is not the Élysée, and that's significant. He has not invited Putin to the Élysée Palace, to the real centre of power in France, and that is, again, to send out the other signal, which is, you know, we think you're important, but you're not our friend, and you need to make some kind of step towards us before you get a fully fledged state visit with all that goes with that.
Yeah, and Steve, so the Kremlin backed the wrong man or woman. Presumably he's looking at a reset now, is he, given all the allegations against Russia and the fact that he actually was really quite rude about Emmanuel Macron in the campaign?
To a certain extent, yes. I don't think we're going to see a full reset of relations today. This is very much a getting to know you visit. But, you know, President Putin knows that President Macron knows that the Kremlin wanted Marine Le Pen to win, that the Russians didn't say that, of course, publicly, but they certainly showed it. Vladimir Putin met Marine Le Pen quite publicly in Moscow just ahead of the French election. And the pro-Kremlin press here before that election was full of praise for Marine Le Pen and scathing in its criticism of Emmanuel Macron. I remember just before the election, one of the most popular papers here, comes from Moscow Pravda, pro-Kremlin paper, described Mrs. Macron as a wrinkly old lady and said that Emmanuel Macron reminded it of a shiny fake coin who said stupid things. This was the kind of language you got ahead of that election. Now, things have changed somewhat in terms of the language being used by the pro-Kremlin media out here. And there is a sense that the Russians would like to see a new page being turned in relations between Paris and Moscow.
Hugh, what is going to be on the agenda? I mean, presumably what, Ukraine and other issues as well, and Syria.
Yeah, well, Macron has said he wants a dialogue, but a dialogue without concession. So there's not going to be any backing away from French positions and French opposition to Russia on the key issues of Syria and Ukraine. Macron says he wants a dialogue, he wants to talk, he wants to set up a relationship. But as we saw over the weekend with his appearances at the G7 and at NATO, he's in a supremely confident, self-confident form. I mean, by nature, he's a very self-confident person, and that self-confidence, comes with him into the presidency. So he is not going to be brushed aside by Putin's arguments against the French position. He's going to be very, very assertive, I think, and what he wants above all is some kind of recognition from Putin that Europe is back. I mean, I think he believes that Putin backed completely the wrong horse. It was banking on a kind of populist collapse in Europe that never happened. Instead, there's Macron representing this new Europe, and he wants some recognition of that change in this conversation with Putin today.
And Steve, where are we in terms of the Minsk agreements on the situation in Ukraine? Any movement there at all?
There's been very little movement. I mean, the Minsk agreements, it had been hoped would actually provide a path to solving this Ukraine crisis, Ukraine conflict. It hasn't worked out that way, although a short while ago it was announced there would be a meeting on the Minsk agreements at Deputy Foreign Minister level in the coming days. So a sign perhaps there could be some movement, but really up till now there's been no sign of a major breakthrough in this conflict, and it's hard to see whether the Putin-Macron meeting later today can actually provide a key breakthrough there.
OK, Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, Hugh Schofield in Paris, thank you both very much indeed. We'll try and take you live to the Palace of Versailles when that visit happens a little later on in the programme. You're watching GMT. In other stories, Donald Trump supporting his son-in-law Jared Kushner after claims he tried to set up back channels with the Russian ambassador in December. In a statement given to the New York Times, the president praised Mr. Kushner, describing him as doing a great job. Donald Trump didn't directly address the allegations made against him, though. More than 160 people are now known to have died in monsoon rainstorms in Sri Lanka. More bodies have been found buried in landslides. More than 100 people remain missing. Sri Lanka's worst floods for 14 years have forced almost 500,000 people to leave their homes. Authorities in Morocco have reportedly detained a leading activist who's been organising protests against corruption and abuses of power in the north of the country. Nasser Zefsafi had been on the run since his arrest was ordered on Friday. Protests began months ago in the north of Morocco, but have spread to other parts of the country. Now, in the latest of a series of provocative missile launches, North Korea has test-fired its third ballistic missile in as many weeks, its 12th this year. That's despite warnings of UN sanctions and threats of possible military action by the US. The short-range missile early this morning local time flew for 6 minutes, landing in Japan's exclusive economic zone. It's thought to have been fired from near the coastal city of Wonsan. Japan has strongly condemned the move. Steve Evans joins us now from Seoul, and South Korea promising a strong, firm response as well. What?
Good question. It's almost like Groundhog Day, this. There is a missile launch a week, something like 10 this year, and each time you could almost read the statement from the previous one. Condemnation from Prime Minister Abe, serious threats to our security from Seoul, President Trump studying the matter, going to call on China for tougher sanctions. It's hard to see what can be done beyond what is being done. A little bit of tightening, but there's no evidence so far that the sanctions of the last decade are anywhere near bringing Kim Jong-un to a change of mind. So in this country, in South Korea, there is now a dilemma, because we have a new president who's been in for 3 weeks, and he came in saying that there would be discussions with the North. There would be a more congenial approach, if you like,
from the previous hard line. But throughout that olive branch being handed out, there have been these missile tests. So you get the sense that from the north, they're absolutely determined on a course of action, and nothing is going to sway them from it. There may be things going on in the background, but it's hard to see.
And yet the technology on this occasion is old, isn't it? This is a Scud missile. It's been around since the 1950s, so it's not as if he's developing those longer-range missiles on this occasion.
Well, we don't know what's being tested, do we? First of all, he may be testing, for example, or his military, Kim Jong-un's military, may be testing a booster for a longer-range missile. He may be testing all kinds of aspects which will help the development of much longer-range missiles. The state of play at the moment is Kim Jong-un says that he's very near to getting an intercontinental ballistic missile. Outside experts say he may be near, but he's not there yet. But all the signs are that strides are being made. So the important bits of technology, for example, solid fuel. That means that missiles can be launched very quickly. These missiles are being launched often from trailers. That means they can't be detected. So there are all kinds of significant advances being made each time. We had duds being fired at the beginning of the year. It now seems that the tests are firing off reliable missiles, or certainly missiles that go a goodly distance.
Just briefly, Steve, obviously a huge US presence always in South Korea, but what of that battle fleet, the USS Carl Vinson, is that still in the area?
Well, we are told it is, but after the, how can I put this politely, the confusion of a month ago where we were told that the Armada, in Mr. Trump's words, was sailing here and actually it was sailing in the opposite direction, it's very hard to know what's going on with those ships.
OK, Steve Insolt, thank you very much indeed. Stay with us here on GMT, on BBC World News. Still to come, the one that didn't get away. We hear from the Australian fisherman and the moment a great white decided to join him in his boat. Civilians are being hit hardest in the Iraqi city of Mosul as the operation to retake it from Islamic State militants enters its final phase. That's according to the UN. Iraqi forces, supported by Kurds, Shia militia and US forces, are pushing into western Mosul. Well, the east of the city is back in the hands of the government. Our correspondent Alan Johnston reports.
In the ruins of the streets, the battle grinds on. One more shot fired, and in the heat and the dust, the attack continues on the fringes of Mosul's old city. Away in the distance, a minaret. The mosque beneath it is held by the militants, and they may well fight to the death to try to keep it. As the army presses forward, fears grow for the thousands of civilians trapped along with the militants in the old city. They're in danger of being hit accidentally by the attacking government forces, and the UN says the militants are using the civilians as human shields, targeting those who try to escape. Some families do gather their children and run for their lives, risking all the dangers of crossing the front lines. These people have been lucky. They've made it out. And the Iraqi army is urging all the civilians in the old city to flee if they can. The UN believes as many as 200,000 people may attempt to get away. Meanwhile, the soldiers are gearing up for what will surely be a brutal climax to the battle for Mosul. Alan Johnston, BBC News.
Well, much more on that assault on Mosul and indeed all the other stories on the website at bbc.com/news. Welcome back to GMT with me, Tim Wilcox. A week to the day since the Manchester suicide bomb attack, the police inquiry has moved more than 250 miles away to the south coast of Britain. A 23-year-old man has been arrested in Shoreham by